Mike Tomlin talked about the Steelers' plans moving forward at quarterback as Kenny Pickett remains in concussion protocol. Mitch Trubisky, Mason Rudolph, there's no committed plan. But what should they do? I'm Chris Carter of the Locked On Steelers podcast. We'll talk about that with our guest, Tony Serino, who's back on the show. It's going to be a fun one. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things of the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Odyssey, and especially on YouTube. If you watch this video on YouTube, hit the like button in the video if you enjoy it. Hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered all season long with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. As I said before, we welcome back our man, Tony Serino. You can find him on Twitter at Steeler Country. Tony, you're back. Yeah. It's been a rough one, though. Because
I thought I was only on here after wins, Chris. That was
the plan. You were supposed to only be on here after wins.
When we planned this out, we talked about this last week. I couldn't make it last week, but I said, listen, they're going to beat the Ravens. I'll be back. We're talking about a big win, Kenny's big game, and then what happened?
This happened. They lose to the Ravens 16-14.
Yikes. 3 interceptions later.
Yeah, 3. Kenny Pickett knocked out of the game. We saw some explanation of what happened with Mike Tomlin, and it was along the lines of what I said with Wes Euler as far as explaining, because a lot of people were saying, well, how did Kenny Pickett go back in and then and get brought back out? How could that even happen? And Mike Tomlin simply said, he's like, listen, I can't explain the neuroscience of it, but basically it was he went through a long test in the blue tent from trainers, from doctors. He passed all the tests, went back on the field, but how the concussion protocol works, even if you pass the initial test, you are continually evaluated after hit, and it was determined after he came off the field after that next 3 and out, it was determined he wasn't right. Yeah. And they pulled him out. And thank goodness nothing happened to him before then, but that's just part of the rule. So obviously that's what happened there. Tony, just wanted to get your reaction, because I don't think that it ended up being a not a big deal, because Kenny Pickett was eventually protected and nothing else happened to him. Yeah. But how much is this a concern if you think that about future quarterbacks and about future players, period, that something like this, there was a window where something could have gone bad. And then we saw what happened with the Patriots game where Nelson Aguilar had to stop the game and say Devontae Parker ain't right.
Yeah, exactly. We saw this earlier this year. Obviously, the Tua thing. It's crazy that this happened in the same season where, Tua came back into a game where he was very clearly not right, and then the very next week, he gets hit again, and in an even more brutal way. So you're right. I think this needs to get taken a look at again in the offseason, just to make sure that they're diagnosing these things correctly. Now, potentially, what happened here is that. Because my assumption with on game day was Kenny passed the original test, but then when he went back out there, right, he didn't, something didn't feel right with him, and he self-reported something, right? Because it felt like that's the easiest way for this to happen. If he comes on the sideline, back on the sideline, and says, "Hey, I'm feeling a little dizzy now," or I got a headache or something, easy way for the doctor to be like, "Yep, you're out of there." But you're right. This is not just a one-off. This is not just a one-off case of that's a weird thing that they were letting him go out there for a series and then brought him back. We've seen this with Tua earlier this year. Like you said, we saw this in the Patriots game. So it's definitely something that needs to be looked at in the NFL, because, the more we learn about head trauma, the more we learn about how these concussions affect you later in life. This is something the NFL, look, to their credit, they've tried to take this seriously, but, they need to be better about, putting guys back into, the line of fire in the National Football League.
I agree about that. But let's talk specifically about the Steelers now. Mike Tomlin, when asked about the situation, he did say if Kenny Pickett is cleared, that he will play. So there's at least that news. But when asked about what would happen if he didn't play, wasn't as clear. Someone asked if Mitch Trubisky is going to be the number 2 quarterback of the season. If he was the number 2 quarterback this season, what is it about Mason that makes him join the conversation? And he says, we work on both guys, and both guys have remained engaged. It's really kind of been a 2 and 2A, if you will. There's a scarcity of reps, but again, as he mentioned, you've got veteran backups, guys with cumulative body of work, and particularly in Mason's case, haven't been exposed to us, and having been there with the receivers, potentially that they would work all of those options there. He also says, he's not committed to Mason or Mitch. They're going to take it day by day, and it's going to be about just Kenny Pickett being able to participate and seeing how that goes. Tony, after Mitch Trubisky's 3 interception game, is this there's some people in town that do feel like Mason Rudolph should be the guy. I don't think he will be. I'm not saying that you're wrong for saying maybe Mason should get another chance, because this would be the 3rd season that he would have gotten to start if he were to start this weekend. And in none of the other games I don't think anyone's come away and said, yeah, that's the guy of the future. But at the same time, you're in a game where you need the quarterback, the backup quarterback, to not turn the ball over, to just take what's there and keep it moving. And there's times to get aggressive. There's nothing wrong with turning up and taking a shot now and then. But when you commit those turnovers, you cost your team, and 3 picks that might have wiped away 3 field goals in a game you lost by 2 points proved costly.
Don't you think? I've heard this a lot. Okay, Trubisky was aggressive, right? I'm not going to disagree with people who say Trubisky was aggressive.
Right, he was aggressive in this game.
He was aggressive. Were those interceptions because of his aggression, or because he just didn't see the linebacker on those plays?
I'll say it was because he was aggressive without doing the proper checks and not using his eyes properly. Because in each of those, he had one target. It was clear the entire time. When you watch back, and even all 22 that's out now, you can see his head. It goes right to the person he's throwing to and sticks with them the whole time, especially on the 2 passes over the middle with Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen. Both times you see them, they're just watching him. And so they're able to drop back, and they know where you're going with the ball because you're staring at your man the entire time. And then with the deep ball to Deontay Johnson, he was staring at him the whole time. The free safety breaks on Deontay Johnson before Mitch Trubisky has even thrown the ball. And it's just those things. It's not the aggressiveness itself, but if you're going to be aggressive, you have to do all of the checks to leading up to that, and he just didn't. And he even admitted after the game. I had the clip on this very show on our Monday episode where he admitted he didn't do enough with his eyes.
Yeah, exactly. So that's my thing. It's to me, aggressiveness is, hey, it's a tight window throw, I'm going to fit it in between. But it's like you're not fitting it anywhere. You're throwing it right to a linebacker that you didn't like you said, Chris, that you didn't look off, and so he's got an easy window into your throwing lane. Yeah, as far as should it be Mason? Should it be Mitch? First of all, I love Tomlin's answer today when he says it's 2 and 2A, man. I just can't. When we go back to training, when I had to smile because I go back to training camp when Tomlin kept telling us open competition, and then Mitch took every single first team reps.
Yeah,
is this a real competition? Look, I for those of you who don't watch me on AFC North Talk, I am now a football nihilist. Nothing matters anymore. But and the reason I say that is we're now. Look, I know Steelers fans don't want to hear this, but they're not going to make the playoffs this year in all likelihood. I mean, they could still go 9-8, and they could still,
As what put out, if I put up the names that people we put into our stuff, he had football nihilists ready to be on his banner right here. If you're watching on YouTube,
that's right. Because since the break, I've had this line on AFC North Talk. The only thing that matters between now and the end of the season is figuring out what works about this offense, specifically guys like Kenny Pickett, the offensive line, Najee Harris, right? Figuring out this offense is what matters. So if it's going to end up being backup quarterback for the rest of the way, I mean, take your pick. I will ask you this though, Chris. Look, Mitch Trubisky did sign a 2-year deal.
Yes, he did.
Mason Rudolph is likely gone because I think the fact that he was a 3rd string quarterback next year, he's likely not signing back in to that next year. But there is I guess there is still a possibility that Mitch could still be the backup next year, right? And if that's the case, then I guess there's some utility in continuing to work him into this and continuing to get him comfortable with Canada's offense and the receiving core here. And in that way, look, everything about between now and the end of the season is about 2023 in some way. So Mitch is still a prep for 2023 in some ways, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it could be. It could very well be that. But part of me wonders, does Mitch Trubisky want somewhere else if he knows that Kenny Pickett's the guy? And Mitch Trubisky's contract was drawn up so that they could make a move if necessary. But if I'm the Steelers, I find a way to try to keep him because Mason Rudolph will be gone next year. I'm that seems yes. pretty clear by things he said and how this year has played out. And do you really want to have 2 new backup quarterbacks behind Kenny Pickett when, Mitch Trubisky, hasn't been good for you guys, but he at least knows your system.
And has it, look, and obviously I can't be in the locker room, right? But it does feel like he's been a decent teammate, right? And all of that, right? I mean, as long as he's in there, because what you're going to want now out of your backup is not just like a guy who can come in a pinch and play well, right? But you want, the old like Charlie Batch type or the Josh Dobbs type, right? The guy who your starter's going to the sideline and feels comfortable. Hey, here's what I saw. What did you see, right? And then these two can work off of one another. And as long as Mitch has that in his personality and him and Kenny get along in that way, I think there's certainly utility in bringing him back in 23.
Certainly. We'll talk a little bit more about this, but we also got to talk about what is the top priority for this team right now as far as fixing their problems, not just this year, but moving forward and what the Steelers are going to do. We'll talk about that in just a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, so don't go anywhere. But first, we got to talk to you guys about LinkedIn. Of course, LinkedIn is the number one place that people go to look for jobs. So if you're looking for people to sign on to your job and for people to recruit, LinkedIn is also the place for you. You can create a free job post in minutes on LinkedIn Jobs to reach your network and beyond to the world's largest professional network of over 810 million people. Then add your job in the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile, and you can spread the word that you're hiring so your network can help you find the right people to hire. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs number one in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Job helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Did you know that every week, nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn? Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. We're also brought to you by Audible. Audible is releasing a new slate of football podcasts that we're sure you're going to love. Find Think Like a Champion now wherever you get your podcasts. Think Like a Champion is a brand new podcast from Russell Wilson and Audible. Russ is a champion on the field, but off of it, we rarely know the grind on the path to greatness. Russell Wilson, alongside co-hosts Harry Wilson and the late Trevor Mowat, digs into high-performance athletes, artists, and leaders who push the boundaries of their potential. Here, two-time Super Bowl champion and MVP Von Miller delivers sharp insights about performing at your highest level in moments of extreme pressure. Or NCAA champion Tim Tebow, who discuss how to find your unique personal mission in the world. Head over to Locked On Presents for a sneak peek of Think Like a Champion, or catch the full series available anywhere you get your podcasts. Available everywhere now. Audible, get in the game. As we do always here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, we keep it rolling on back-to-back ad reads. Let's keep it rolling with this. Last thoughts here, Tony. If I agree with you that Mitch Trubisky is the guy that, at least for now, but there's a lot of people out there that are saying, well, what are you doing with even Mason being on the roster? I think Mason's is just the break glass in case of emergency guy here. But I do think that Mitch could be on a bit of a leash in this game. Yeah. If things were to go wrong, the Steelers could try to find a way to say, you know what, Mitch, you got it today. We're gonna give this a shot, especially if it's a close game against the Panthers and he's committing turnovers that's putting the team in a rough spot.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, Mike Tomlin's never had a losing season. Now, it doesn't seem like this team is headed for a winning season, and that's why that's why you got Mason Rudolph on there, because you can still end up 8-1, boys. You need a tie.
If they finish 8-1, it's going to be the craziest thing ever.
8-1 would be bad. Back-to-back years of ties would be great too. I'm with you. Look, I think the one thing Mike Tomlin hates the most out of his offense is an offense that turns the ball over. Right? He just will not accept it. And so if Mitch were to go out there and turn the ball over early, I think you could go back to Mason Rudolph. There's a small part of me, Chris, we talked about this a little bit before the show. There's a small part of me that wants to see Mason, because one of the first storylines this year at training camp was about how good Mason looked. And I've always wanted to see that translate. He's the most comfortable in the system out of the three guys, or he was in training camp. And I wanted to see what he could do, because we already know who he is in years past, but he did transform himself a little bit this year. And I'd be interested to see what that looks like in an NFL game, in a real NFL environment.
I hear you. Mason Rudolph's been there. Yeah. He's done some good things, even though you used to root against him openly because you want still to. That's the thing. At least Tony's not lying to y'all. The longtime fans of this show know that Tony Cerrito was the original Duck Hodges truther.
That's right. Duck should be the third string quarterback on this team, not Mason.
There you go. That's the ultimate take.
But there you go. Yeah.
But all that aside, I think it's interesting to see how this plays out. I'm with you though. I think that Mitch does not have the protection that Ben Roethlisberger did, as we saw, because Kenny Pickett benched him. And because of that, don't think that he'll have some special second quarterback protections that if he's playing terribly, that the Steelers won't switch to the other guy. So we'll see that in a bit here. But I wanted to talk to you about something else here that's more about the long term and addressing other parts of the roster here, because the Steelers absolutely need a lot of help moving forward. There's certain assets that long term should be able to work. TJ Watt, Minkah Fitzpatrick. You're hoping Najee Harris, Pat Freiermuth, George Pickens, Kenny Pickett. Those guys are all part of the long-term plan. But you could pick at several different groups that need immediate help and the long-term superstar that's going to help kind of lead them into the future. Offensive line, defensive line, the linebacker position, the cornerback position. Everyone, those groups are obviously missing a complete star that can at least carry them in the toughest of moments. And with that being said, what if you had to pick only one group? What is the most important thing? If the Steelers fix nothing else, they could only fix one thing this offseason in the free agency, in the draft, that'll be solidified, not only not a liability anymore, but an actual asset. What is that most important thing this offseason?
It's a great question. And I do think it kind of changes, the results are any way that our brain works, right? Where it's like the recency bias of, I just saw that happen and that needs to not happen again, right? So I think we're all going to lean today and say, boy, that defensive line needs to get upgraded and quickly, because can't have that happen again, right? I mean, losing that way to Baltimore, third string quarterback, and they just kind of ran it at will at the end there was gross to watch. I'm sure for all Steeler fans, but so that to me is obviously top of mind. I understand people are going to say offensive line. I get that. But the offensive line has a lot of young pieces on it. You could also, I guess you could make the same argument about the defensive line though, right? I mean, like, do you need to improve a defensive line that has Isaiah Loudermilk going into year 3 and DeMarvin Leal going into year 2, right? What this team really needs out of the defensive line next year is not necessarily to add a top 15-ish guy on the defensive line. They really need Leal in year 2 to pop, or they need Loudermilk in year 3 to pop a little bit and become, those every down guys. Obviously, that room needs to get deeper because guys like Wormley likely aren't going to be back. Alu obviously will not be back. And we'll see about, Ogunjobi probably won't be back. And then we'll see about Montravius Adams. I know he has a contract, but I just can't imagine that he's going to be this, a starting caliber player again next season. So I think defensive line stands out, but here's the thing. Like, if you would have gone back to after Cincinnati, what would everyone have said? We would have all said corner, right? Yeah. It would have been, hey, this team needs a number 1 corner.
Yep.
Now, Cam Sutton's gone next year. Arthur he could be re-signed, but I'm saying, like, he does not have a contract going into next year. Mollett, I think does have a contract still 1 more year, and so does Levi Wallace.
I think each of them are technically on 2-year deals. Let me look that up real quick.
Yeah. I know Levi Wallace is on a 2-year deal. I'm not sure about Mollett.
I think he might be on this. It might have been like a situation where he got renewed for a temporary thing.
Right. At linebacker, you can make the argument about, like, well, Mark Robinson, everybody was hyped about Mark Robinson in the preseason. Now, is that actually going to turn itself into, what was that guy remember the Florida State guy?
Also, both Mollett and Levi Wallace are signed next year.
Right. So see, you can start, the Steelers, it's interesting because we're going to go into an offseason with this new GM, new assistant GM, Weidel and Kahn, and them working together. What's their draft strategy? What's their free agency strategy? It's a lot of positions here where we as fans, everyone's going to go, they have to do this. They have to get better at this position. But if you look at that offensive line, what position are they going to be dire at? Where it's like, you have to upgrade that position. I don't know that there is left guard probably is your,
left guard and also left tackle.
Left tackle you can get better at, but Dan Moore's, he's not a great player, but is Dan Moore going to hold you back? I got a question for you, because you said this on the podcast the other day, and it stuck with me. Okay. You said on the show the other day, you said the Steelers aren't going to be a 30-point offense anytime soon. So, the Steelers got to get used to that. And I thought to myself, okay, that's probably true, but how long until they get to be 30 points? And what do they need to upgrade about this offense? What players do they need to add to this offense to get there?
I do think go ahead.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I thought that was a question, but I get what you're. Go ahead. Finish your point.
No, I was going to say, like, because I get that you can. Are the Steelers an offensive line away from being a 30-point a game offense, or is it just growth and development of the young players?
That's a great question, and I think it is the latter. I think it's they need, but see, I think it's both, because you do need to develop these players. Kenny Pickett needs time to grow, and we've seen growth this year. He's a different quarterback than he was when he started the year, when he was throwing interceptions every game, and I think we're certainly seeing, in the leadership aspect is certainly there. Najee Harris is improving. Pat Freiermuth is improving. I think George Pickens is improving, but we'll see it. You have to give him more targets for that to happen, and that again depends on Kenny Pickett. But a really good offensive line can make everything else look so much better. Najee Harris runs better when the run game runs better. Guys get more open. When guys get more open, quarterbacks feel more comfortable, and it all starts to build on top of each other. That's a big part of what led to the Titans' rise to kind of be a better team in the AFC. Granted, they haven't done anything with it, but still, that was a big part of what they had. And your hope is that, well, you're going to have Kenny Pickett, not Ryan Tannehill, and Kenny Pickett can turn out to be a franchise guy. So if I had to pick one of either that situation, you take the development of the offense, which I think goes to your point that maybe the offensive line should be a priority. Like if you're sitting there, the Steelers have the 13th overall pick of the NFL draft. If you're sitting at pick 13 and Paris Johnson, the tackle from Ohio State, is there, right, and the top defensive line prospects are gone, and you're not so sure about the score, go and get him. We're not saying ignore the offensive line, but I do feel you that, say you're in a position where, they lose a few more games and they're in the top 10, and let's just say, just for the sake of argument, that Jalen Carter and Peter Skoranek, the top defensive tackle and the top left tackle of this class, they're both sitting there. What is the bigger priority there? And you know what, going along with what you're saying, I know this may be recency bias, but I would take the defensive tackle. And I know that people are going to be like, but you got to protect Kenny Pickett. I think you could still you have 2 more draft picks in the second round. I think you can still get good offensive linemen there, but I think this team needs a flagship carrier, star defensive lineman, the way they've had Cam Hayward for several years, who can take that flag from Cam Hayward and say, hey, Steelers defensive line is going to be big, bad, and here to stay. We just needed some more blood. And then DeMarvin Leal could work in with that guy, because I think Leal is part of the future for the Steelers. I think he's going to be a good asset for them for some time. But I also think that they need a guy who is purely a big, mauling defensive lineman who just knocks people around and creates problems at the line of scrimmage.
Right. And it's like this marginal value thing of how far away are the Steelers from having an elite defensive line, right? Especially outside of Cam Hayward, I mean, do they have anyone even close to that? And then, how far away are they? When you look, Dan Moore is an interesting case, because I agree that they could upgrade over Dan Moore, but I don't think it's a requirement of this offense. Like, Dan Moore is holding back this offense from being anything great because of his play on the field, right? Whereas I do think that the Steelers are still paying for it, and you said this so well the other day. The Steelers are still paying for the retirement with the retirement of Stephon Tuitt, right? His retirement is like this trickle down of okay, now they've had to go with Wormley and Montrevious Adams and trying to make Larry Ogunjobi. Yeah, I mean, Ogunjobi's a decent pass rusher, but you want to use him as a run stuffer, you're going to have a bad time as a Steelers.
Which is what I said was going to be a problem from the time that they signed him.
Exactly. So that's why I think, I mean, I'm not saying that the Steelers shouldn't upgrade on the offensive line. What I'm saying is there are other positions that I'd probably them rather address, especially if they can get better players at those positions. Right? All things being equal, I'd rather have another player than an offensive lineman at this point of the team building process.
We're going to get more into that discussion, because I think that this is something we're going to talk about a lot this offseason. But at least today, I wanted to talk with you because you and I have these conversations a lot, and I think this would be a fun one for fans to listen in on. So let's keep this talk going. But first, we're going to talk to you guys because today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline is your number one source for all your betting stats and sports information. Find out all these sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's NFL season that's getting closer and closer to the NFL playoffs. Also, you got the NBA, the NHL, NFL, college sports, and so much more going on right now. Go to BetOnline and you can learn about all the betting odds, all the ends, and even listen to BetOnline podcasts that help you get ready for all the bets you need to make. Go to BetOnline right now. And when you go to BetOnline, they're your continued source for all your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today. Use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action when you visit BetOnline, where the game starts. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm Chris Carter. He's Tony Serino. Tony, let's keep talking here about this situation, because I think this is something we are going to hash a million times before we get to the NFL draft, let alone free agency, let alone the combine. So many things to do here. And I know that this is very much just kind of skipping ahead of the final few games here, but I think Steelers fans could probably use some of the looking forward right now with the 5-8 record and, the way that this season is gone. But like you said, if this Steelers team were to invest, were to change anything right now, if they could get a dominant defensive line, I mean, let's go back and look at at the wins that they've had over the last 2 years. And this is part of where I'm going at it with the defensive line. Is still kind of should be the priority. I know everyone wants to fix the offensive line, and they should address the offensive line. I'm not saying they shouldn't.
Just fix the trenches. It's just that easy. Just wave a magic wand and fix the trenches.
Just do it like that. But you look over the past 2 years, they've won now. This is 14 games that they've won, with 4 games to go in 2022. All but one. So 13 of those 14 wins have come when the Steelers have held a team to 20 points or less.
Yeah.
This team right now is just designed to, they're going to find a way to win because the defense played really well and the offense did enough to win. And the offense can get better, and I think it will get better over time. But you have to be able to stuff the run and rush the passer. And the things that they've struggled with last year and this year, stuffing the run, this year rushing the passer. If you get a stalwart defensive lineman, and it's not just the draft. I think they're gonna need to spend an early pick on it and go get some new blood in free agency. But get guys into Pittsburgh who can help change the tone there at the line of scrimmage on the defensive side. You're going to put yourself in a better situation to win football games that way. And I'm kind of with you that offensive line, like, again, in the scenario, I don't like to say who they should pick with the 13th overall pick here in December, because they're not going to have the 13th overall pick. They're probably going to have some other pick. And then we don't know how combines will go and whose stock will rise and fall. I think it's just pointless to say that. But if we're looking at what the priority of focus should be, it's definitely on both the sides of the trenches. But I think that the defensive line is becoming more of that priority, because like you said, and like I've said a lot of times, Stephon Tuitt being hurt has set them back so much.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. I mean, the other thing you could, I'll make the argument. I certainly they need to upgrade them on the defensive line. I think, I'm pretty confident that one of those first 3 picks, one of either the first round pick or the 2 seconds will end up being a D lineman, right? I mean, I think that they can't ignore what's been going on. Potentially, you could. I don't know. I mean, I guess they could avoid it by just hoping on that Leal pops.
Guys, we have breaking news literally on the show as we're happening. The Steelers have done it. They fixed the defensive line. Field Yates reports that they have signed defensive tackle Jonathan Marshall off the Jets practice squad to their 53-man roster. He entered the league as a 2021 6th-round pick out of Arkansas. The defensive line is saved. Forget it. What I said about Jalen Carter. I'm just joking, but that literally just happened as we're recording this episode.
Verbal meme? Who? Like the Guardians of the Galaxy?
That's what it is, man.
Yeah. I mean, no offense to Joshua Marshall, you said his name is?
Jonathan Marshall.
Jonathan Marshall. Well, of course, household name, man. How could I? No, I mean, they I guess warmly going on IR.
I mean, that's absolutely right. Tomlin confirmed he was getting knee surgery, which means even if he's not on IR, if you're on IR, you're done for the season. And knee surgery is something that I think you just get back up from. And like there's light knee surgeries. We saw a couple at Pitt this year covering them as a football team. But yeah, I think this is clearly that. But also you never know because Montravius Adams, even though he's been bad this year, last year when he came in, he gave some good spells and just some good moments here and there. If this guy can help with that in the final weeks, so be it. But I do apologize. I interrupted your overall.
No. It's all good. It's all good. Now, all I was going to make the argument is that this is a decent. I mean, and you literally just got done saying don't talk about individual players, but it's a decent corner class. So I was going to say there's some interesting.
Yes, it is.
There's some interesting corner prospects that you could see. One thing I've kind of thought this has been spinning around, and it will be a luxury. Although when the Steelers were looking like they were going to get a top 5 pick, and a lot of us were daydreaming about a world where the Steelers could draft Will Anderson, which would have also been a luxury pick, although an awesome luxury. Tight end in the first round, like a Michael Mayer out of Notre Dame. How stupid an idea is that?
Very dumb.
Yeah.
very, Tony, if they draft a tight end in the first round, I will throw this keyboard at the wall. All right,
with the Claypool pick, second round.
Throw this keyboard at the wall.
All right. Maybe I got ahead of myself because remember last time we were talking about how much the 12 personnel was working. I was like, Michael Mayer, he's pretty good. He gets an extra pick. All right. We'll throw that one aside.
Have you not paid attention? Connor Hayward is the next.
That's
true.
Next
George Kittle. So
that's true.
You've been missing.
That was an awesome catch this week.
It was an awesome catch. He does that a lot. I covered him in the Peach Bowl against Pitt in the stadium where he caught the touchdown for the Steelers last week against the Falcons. That dude makes ridiculous catches, and I'm not saying that he's your future tight end one over Pat Freiermuth, but I think he could be a really good utility kind of backup tight end type of guy to fit in there. Also, Jonathan Marshall last year played 77 total snaps for the Jets. PFF graded him at the end of the year with a 37.7 grade. Not exactly.
He's Minka level. He's saying he's Minka Fitzpatrick.
He's Minka Fitzpatrick. That is what they've graded him. But he has not played any snaps this season, according to Pro Football Focus. So there is that. But again, just 6'3", 317 guy added to the mix there. But again, I think this all plays into who they are right now. I think is very much about just getting back to stuffing the run, rushing the quarterback, having that identity, and in that way there isn't as much pressure on your offense to score as many points. And here's the other thing: if you invest in the defensive front for next year, and you find at least one guy who's really, really good, the young new upstart guy, and you get a couple guys in free agency who are solid as rotational guys, you're expecting TJ Watt to be back to being where he was. He'll be 100% next year. You're expecting Alex Highsmith to stick around and be part of that. Then that defensive front can be dominant the way that people were hoping they would be, this time last year when they were when everyone thought Stephon Tuitt might come back. So I think that plays a big part of where the Steelers are right now.
Yeah, and I just think, going back to the offense versus defense discussion, there's a lot of pieces that can be added, right? I mean, certainly no one's gonna argue that the Steelers shouldn't take a top corner in this class if he's available. Right? I mean, the best really corner is there. Yeah, I mean, you can make an argument. Let's do it. Top linebackers there. I mean, maybe not over a D lineman or a corner, but still, take a linebacker. Sure, yeah. I mean, Devin Bush likely not going to be here next year. And then even safety is an interesting one because Terrell Edmonds again is on a 1-year deal. Maybe KZ just sticks around. I don't really I don't know what's going to happen there, but regardless, there's far more holes going into 2023 on defense than I think people understand with how many people are going to leave the system. And on offensive side, they're not right. You're not drafting for the big skill positions. You could upgrade on the offensive line, but even then, all these offensive linemen are likely coming back for next year. Maybe not Dotson, but everyone else is back on contract. On the defensive side, you got a lot of guys that are just going to leave the organization and probably not going to get re-signed. And so that's where they have to go back to the well, because like you said, right now, this is a team built in the image of Mike Tomlin. And what Mike Tomlin wants is a team that's going to be dominant defensively and an offense that's not going to screw it up for that defense. And if you want to continue being that, you better get some new blood on that defense, because you can't just live in a world where TJ's great, Minka's great, Cam's great, but kind of on, at the end of the line there.
Yeah.
And then just, surrounded by a bunch of Joes. So you're going to have to bring some new blood and some quality talent into that mix.
Absolutely. We'll talk more about those new blood because, like we said, there is a cornerback class here that is very intriguing, and I think they should and will tap into this year. I know a lot of people say, don't draft a cornerback, but this is a year where there's a lot of guys at the top of the list, a lot of 6'2" guys who can run, who can jump, who can play the ball well. It's a fascinating class. We'll get to more into that as the season and off season eventually get here. We got a lot of time to talk draft stuff, but just wanted to talk that kind of stuff with Tony Serino because he's the man out there. Thanks so much for joining us, Tony. As always, let people know they can find you, follow you, get more of your work.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Steeler Country. You can find me on AFC North Talk. It's a roundtable show all about the AFC North. And you can find that Mondays and Fridays right now on YouTube.
Absolutely. Do check Tony out on AFC North Talk, even though it's been rough on AFC North Talk lately for Tony. It's all right. It's still a fun show. He brings the heat on the show and will entertain Steelers fans. Thanks again, everyone, for checking out the show. I'm Chris Carter, host of the Locked On Steelers podcast. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you watch this video on YouTube, like the video, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you for making us our first listen every day. And if you want to get a shout out at the end of the show, leave us a 5-star review with a positive comment on Apple Podcasts. Do both at the same time, and you get a special shout out at the end of the show. Thanks again. We're back tomorrow with Crossover Thursday right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, breaking things down on the Panthers. We'll see you then.